I'm Joanna West, Chair of the party's Women's Network Steering Committee. I'm delighted to be joined tonight by Mcginnis, Abigail Marshall-Katung and Emma Foodie. This evening will be about smashing the stereotypes that exist as we work towards a world free of bias, stereotypes and discrimination, a world that is diverse, equitable and inclusive, a world where difference is valued and celebrated, and where women's equality is ensured. Our first speaker tonight is Mcginnis. Kim has been a councillor and cabinet member for Newcastle City Council and was then elected as Northumbria's Police and Crime Commissioner in 2019. I really look forward to hearing from you, Kim, because you're the only member of the panel that I haven't met. So I will hand over to you now.
Oh, Joanna, I hope we can sort that out and meet soon. That would be really lovely. It's been you don't need me to say it. It's been 2 years where actually no one's met anybody new, and it's just enough of a novelty to meet people who you met before. I keep meeting people who I hadn't seen since before the pandemic, and it just feels so lovely to do things in person. But it has broadened our minds, hasn't it, so that we can meet across borders like this really casually just on a Wednesday night, whereas before this just wouldn't be able to happen. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you today, and it feels it's great to do it kind of in the immediate aftermath of International Women's Day. And I had a little look through the event briefing and kind of what we were going to talk about, and it's really, really broad ranging. So I thought probably what I would do, if it suits people, is I'll talk a little bit about me and my background and kind of how I've got to where I am, and along the way I'll give you a bit of an insight into, I think, some of the biases that I definitely have felt as a police and crime commissioner, as a female police and crime commissioner, as when I was elected, not anymore, with the advent of Emily Spurrell in Merseyside, as the youngest, and I was the only Labour woman for a while. Then I'll talk a little bit about my broader agenda, a lot of which I think does cover women and girls, particularly violence against women and girls. And then I do have some reflections on, I suppose, what's going on in the world at the moment, and I guess how we can use our own lens to try and add support to women, not just locally, but nationally and internationally. So as Joanna said, I am the Police and Crime Commissioner for Northumbria. So we're the right at the top of the country border in Scotland, and it covers Berwick to Sunderland. It's massive. It's 2,500 square miles. I think it's the best place in the whole world. We've got the best beaches, the best cities, the best place. If you've not been to the Northeast, visit immediately, if not sooner. And it's an absolute pleasure to represent it. And I kind of came from a background where I never had any intention, certainly, of ever being elected. This is never what I expected or thought my career would be. And in fact, my family background is very working class. I'm from the West End of Newcastle. My dad was a shipbuilder. My mum worked, well, she didn't when I was little, and then she worked in the civil service. I was the first person in my family to go to university, and I mean the extended family. And then I graduated, and I did what you were told you were supposed to do when you graduate. And I went on a graduate scheme and worked for a bank, and that was absolutely awful, completely not for me. And it wasn't the Co-op, it was HSBC. Then I did a bit of recruitment, worked for a couple of other commercial businesses before, I suppose, taking a step back and moving back towards the student movement. And I worked in students' unions for a while, before transitioning to a wider kind of charitable career, where I worked for Groundwork, which is a community and environmental charity. And when I was elected as Police and Crime Commissioner, I was a director within Walking with the Wounded, which is a military charity. My husband is military, and so that's very close to my heart and very close to our family. I was elected, first of all, onto Newcastle City Council in 2015, but actually I'd stood the year before in 2014. And this, I suppose, is where the accidental career starts. I'd moved back to Newcastle, having lived away for a few years, desperate always to be back in the Northeast. And it was 2013, and, you know, the Tories were starting to bite it was that horrible time where we're starting to feel austerity, and I'd worked with students and young people, and I just thought it was atrocious, and I really wanted to do something about it. I'd been a Labour Party member my whole adult life, actually, from being about 16, but I'd never really been particularly active. And I'd also moved back, and I think this is relevant because I'd moved back kind of in my mid to late 20s, and most of my friends had kind of coupled up and moved on. Some of them had babies, some of them had moved away. And I thought, right, well, you can kill two birds with one stone here. I'm going to do some campaigning. And I got in touch with Catherine McKinnell, started to do some campaigning for what was then the general election of 2015. And it had been about 5 minutes, and she sat me down and said, I think you should stand for the council. And I did that thing where I was like, no, absolutely not. I couldn't do that. I'm not grown up enough to do that. What could I give to the council? You know, that's not for me. And had explained to me, you know, actually we need women to stand. It's really good to have representation. We should look like the communities we serve. There's hardly any young women on the council. And I still said no. Anyway, they came back and they asked me again. And eventually, the third time of asking, it was very much, look, we need you to stand for the council. And so I did. And I stood in a ward where the sitting councillor was the leader of the opposition on Newcastle, a woman called Anita Lowe. She passed away last year. She was a Lib Dem. She had a massive, massive majority. But rightfully, it was a ward that we should have had, and no one had run it close for years. And then all of a sudden, this campaign picked up pace, and we were getting really good teams out on the doorstep, and we ran it down to a majority of under 100. And of course, at that point, I was pretty hooked. And so the next year, I stood in my home ward of Leamington, where I was successful. And I loved being a councillor. I loved the community aspect of it. You know, I loved the community, which was very helpful. I was very invested in it. And the following year, Nick Forbes asked me to serve on the cabinet, where I took the cabinet role for culture, sport and public health. And by this point, I was still in quite a senior charity role. And what I found was that naturally I was wanting to spend more and more and more of my time at the council, more of my time on my cabinet role, more of my time in my community. And my career plan, which was very seriously, very clearly mapped out to be a chief executive of a caring charity that supported people, particularly from disadvantaged backgrounds, in and around probably criminal justice and poverty and homelessness and so on. Those were the issues that I really cared about, was kind of becoming less and less important to me. And actually in that career choice I had felt quite serious biases. You know, I had moved up quite quickly, and it felt like a constant trying to justify myself. And then I suppose in contrast, the Labour Party and the all-woman shortlist, which I don't think that I'd have ever been convinced to stand the first time in particular, I think did help me to rationalise that and got me across the line as somebody who would consider doing it and consider standing for selection when ultimately I'd be in a room full of women rather than a room full of men. And so gradually I realised that this is actually probably what I might want to do with my life. And Vera Baird was appointed as National Victims Commissioner, and I suppose the rest is history. We went through the same process again, by the way, where I had to be asked multiple times or pushed multiple times by many brilliant women around me in the North East Labour Party to say, no, actually, you should do this, and here are all of the good reasons why. And I think that speaks very much to this year's International Women's Day theme, where we do it even to ourselves before anybody else has done it to us, where quite often we go, well, no, I wouldn't be the best candidate for that, and blah, blah, blah. But I did that on the basis that actually I fundamentally believe that poverty, health inequality, and not having the ideal start in life is a huge contributor towards crime and criminality. You are much more likely to be a victim of crime if you are from a disadvantaged background, if you suffer health inequalities. I'd learned a lot of that through my public health portfolio. And similarly, I'd seen some of the some of the good and the bad and the ugly within policing through things like Operation Sanctuary, which was just child sexual exploitation scandal in, well, it wasn't a scandal actually, it was very well handled, I shouldn't say that, in Newcastle. And then I'd seen some of the brilliant aspects of policing through the major events aspect of the portfolio. I was selected 2019, very, very quick campaign. And actually, this is where kind of standing for office at that level, I think I'd been quite lucky through my time at the council, where I'd had, you know, my fair amount of a little bit of sexist online rubbish. A little bit of, you know, my age was always, or still is always, published directly after my name in any article. I don't see that with men very often. I don't know about you. But being a candidate for Police and Crime Commissioner was an eye-opener. And both times round, opposition have proactively used my age and gender, thinly veiled as actually being about level of qualification. And even in the second election, when it's been very much about delivery, and you know, I could prove I had a very proven track record on delivery, including a reduction in knife crime, including an uplift, albeit still rubbish, I must add, in rape convictions, or, you know, proactively delivering, and it was still very much used against me. And I think one of the, and you know, I think there's no point doing these events unless you speak very honestly. I think one of the things that I wish I had had the confidence to do was to call it out in public, and I never did, because I focused on my own campaign and dug in and thought, right, ignore that, ignore the noise, keep going. But actually, I think we need to call it out, and I think if I'm in that situation again, I would very much hope that I would call it out. And since being elected for the second time, I think we've been very clear about putting those core issues into office. So thinking about delivering for women, trying to improve that picture of violence against women and girls. We arrive at this this International Women's Day in the light of the anniversary, the 1 year anniversary of the murder of Sarah Everard, and an awful lot, I think, has changed. But in Northumbria, we've had a very firm commitment to tackling violence against women and girls, tackling domestic abuse. Vera was very much a thought leader. And I think, you know, you sometimes do get stereotyped into that being your issue. It's a women's issue. It's something that she will focus on naturally because she's a woman, but I don't really care about that. And I think, again, we call that out and say, we've got to focus on this because we need to make the world a safer place. We need to make it feel safer for women and girls. And we need to kind of, yes, cut out the noise, but to challenge that, stereotype where we find it, because far too often in my world, women who are experiencing severe domestic abuse are still just asked, well, why don't you just leave? And so I see it in part as my role to publicly challenge that, to put mechanisms and methods to spend money in the right places, to get the right victim services, to make sure that we're tackling that head on all the time. And then I briefly touched on the issue around, you know, what causes crime. And actually, I think some of my best lines on this I've stolen directly from the Co-op manifesto on police and crime commissioners, is, you know, giving communities power to help themselves to prevent crime, making sure that we are in at community level working with youth services and family services, restoring those where we've seen them cut, putting them back into place, supporting families and young people, making sure that there is good levels of education across the board on some of the issues emerging, like knife crime, but also on things like domestic abuse, and almost cutting out that very masculine image of what crime and policing is, which always, the narrative is always about, you know, arresting people, the tough side, making sure that people go to prison. Yeah, there's a place for that, and we have to do it. It's part of society. I think I'd love to see major change, but the fact is that we'll never reduce crime if we don't prevent it. And I think leaning on some of that softer community orientated stuff is actually the hardline stuff. That is where we're getting into the depths and the reasoning why people commit crime, tackling poverty, understanding how we stop women going to prison for fewer than 6 months because ultimately they've had to steal in order to feed their kids, which is a reality for too many people. And some of the challenge that I get back from that, always from men online, is generally, you know, focus on the job at hand. Why aren't you getting these people arrested? Why aren't we chucking them in jail? Why are you, this isn't your job. Why are you politicizing policing? And again, I really just think that I play it with a straight bat and say, no, this is proven. We will reduce crime if we do this, and having the kind of courage of convictions and realizing that the mandate is there behind me with quite an increased majority to deliver this for our region. And I feel really strongly about that. I think looking at things more globally, which, you know, I think it would be really difficult to have this call and not think about what else is going on. You know, we've come out of a pandemic where ultimately women still have carried the burden of the caregiving. You know, women, particularly women from poorer backgrounds, more likely to succumb to the virus. And I think that we have to make sure that women are very much an active part of the recovery, pushing women forward in leadership, making sure that you know, we've seen in countries where there's been strong female leadership, we've had better outcomes. In countries like ours, we have not. And it's very apparent for the world to see. And so to me, it's a really good time to sort of take a deep breath and take confidence in that and say, actually, you know, we should be pushing women into positions of power, and particularly at times of crisis. And I guess that takes me to Ukraine, who I think in terms of equality had been doing a lot better than us. You know, higher levels of women in the in senior elected office, higher levels of women in the military, which obviously we're now seeing the response of, better equality positions. But I found myself reflecting yesterday on women in Ukraine who had fought the same as the rest of us, a hard battle for hard-won freedoms and hard-won equality, who now just have to abandon that and it's all just about survival. And I find that really difficult to think about, and it gives you perspective, but I suppose it makes me think about, well, what can we be doing? And again, supporting those women, looking at what we need to send, how we get to send it, how we channel our money, and I suppose how we provide cooperative solutions to some of that and work through the co-op party to deliver some of it. So I'm ending on a pretty savoury note, but I think it is where we are. I think there's ever such a lot of positive things going on. I think the co-op party is part of what really drives this agenda forward, thinking about how we get women into positions of power and how we embed cooperative values. It's always a really positive space for me. And I think with that, I'll hand over to whoever's next, and I look forward to hearing any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim. We have got a question in for you, but I am going to leave it until the end because I think it will probably be relevant to all our speakers. So absolutely great to hear from you. You're certainly not the only woman to fall into politics, but it's fantastic to see what amazing achievements you've made in a short time. Really glad to hear that you were surrounded by, and hopefully still are, supported by wonderful women. Please keep doing what you're doing and call out that bias. Our second speaker, someone I am proud to call not only my friend, but my sister, Abigail Marshall-Katung. Abigail is the Co-op Party NEC representative for Yorkshire and Humber, and also a Leeds City Councillor. She is one of the best ambassadors for Leeds that you could ask for. Abby, my friend, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jo, for your very, very kind words. Yes, you are a dear sister, and thank you for all the hard work that you do as a cooperative and as a sister. Truly, truly admire your strength and what you do in your council. Abigail Marshall-Katung is my name, and I represent Little London Woodhouse and the city centre in Leeds. Leeds is the most welcoming and best city to live in the UK. So for those of you thinking of relocating, come and join us here in Leeds. So just to also let you know that our co-op conference for this year is also in Leeds. So when I say to you, we're very welcoming, I'm looking forward to seeing and welcoming so many of you to Leeds in October for our conference. So happy International Women's Day to all you strong women still hanging out there and doing what we have been taught to do from time 1900, just name it. And so well done to each and every one of you. Yes, they choose to celebrate us one day, but you know what? It's our choice to celebrate each other every single day. So breaking the bias is the theme for 2022. And I've been asked to tell you a little about my journey, which normally would take us 3 days, but I'll try to do the best I can in 10 minutes. Moved into England, late 90s, 1999, University of Leeds, and I studied a master's in politics and international studies. Didn't join a political party until about 2010. And I was just in the party, learning the ethos, understanding all our values as Labour. Actually, I'll tell you something why I joined Labour. My father died in 1999, and he always used to say to me, when you eventually cross over to England, if you are going to choose a party, he said, choose the Labour Party because you will find yourself there. And I never understood what he said at that time because I was pretty young. But when I came over to England and after the years went by, I understood what my father said. And that's because I found a lot of tolerance and representation in the Labour Party in the UK compared to any other party. Well, I went ahead, finished my studies, and I'm going to tell you about the first bias I came across. Now, for those of you who have tried to look for jobs and you send your CVs around places and you never get called for an interview, it's happened to me. So when we're talking about bias, just the fact that your surname is different from other surnames without people seeing you could be a bias. And my name is Abigail Marshall-Katung. I kept applying for a graduate job that I knew so well I was well qualified for. And I never got called for an interview. And I thought, okay, let me just take up the Katung of my name and see what happens in this CV. So I left Abigail Marshall on the CV and sent it. I got a call the very next day for an interview, but I let it be. I attended the interview and guess what? I got the job. What does that tell you? My last name was a foreign name and I was not going to be given a chance for even an interview based on my name. But do you know what? We persist. And after I got the job and I said, oh, I'm sorry, please, can I put my Katung back? Because I've actually got 2 surnames and I put my full names back on. But every time I sit down and I think about it, it hurts me. And I do know it's not just me facing that kind of discrimination that we're talking about today in terms of challenging the bias and breaking the bias. So for me, I can only say to lots of sisters out there who will find themselves in the kind of situation I found myself is persist and keeping on. Do not be discouraged when the doors shut. Just keep walking and going until you find a window. So I decided to go on in life and God blessed me with twin boys in 2004. And for the first 2 years of their lives, they were very ill. So literally I lived in the hospital. I've got one twin who has undergone 6 surgeries and another one was investigated for epilepsy. My boys are 18 years old today, very strong boys. They are athletes. They're just wonderful children. And time has passed over time. For me, I'm telling you this because some of us start our journeys very, very difficult. But when you persist, things turn around and you can keep going. So for 14 years, whilst my kids were growing, I decided to go self-employed because when I was 7 months pregnant, I was working in retail and I was working for the Cordwell Group Telecommunications. And we used to decorate the shop every end of the month, all the managers and staff members. And I was 7 months, I couldn't even see my feet. And the regional manager walked into the shop and saw me sitting down and says, Abigail, why are you sitting down? So this is one of the problems you face when you work in a male-dominated organization. And I said, well, I'm sitting down because I'm pregnant and I really can't put pictures on the wall because I can't be climbing them ladders. He says, well, if you can't do your work, then go home. I said, okay. And I took my bag and I went home. Now, lots of other people, what that will happen is you get in trouble. You wouldn't know what to do. But for me, as a pregnant woman, as far back as 2003, expecting twins, and I was sent home just because I couldn't put stuff on the wall, I went straight to my doctor to say, this is what's happened to me at work, and I'm very concerned because I may lose my job and I may not know what to do. And she says, did you let him know you were pregnant? And I said, yes. She says, okay, because of your condition, I'm sorry, I will have to give you time off until you have your children, and your employer will have to pay you. And that was the time I started to understand what rights I had as a mother or as an expecting mother working. So my organization lost somebody who would have been working up until March, which was my expected delivery date, but I was sent off in December. So they had to pay me up until my delivery date and also pay me my 6 months maternity. So these are the biases we face as women, but I am telling you this story so that you don't give up and you continue to persist. I joined the Labour Party and I was working as hard as I can, ensuring that I worked with other members of the party in terms of ensuring that I was campaigning, ensuring that I made sure women, especially within the Labour Party where I served, were doing so well in terms of their campaign. I went on and put myself as the women's officer for Leeds North East in 2018. I created the first formal women's forum for our constituency at the time. And my goal and aim was to ensure that we had lots of women standing for political positions within Leeds City at the time. In 2018, it was an all-out election for all of us. And I can guarantee and tell you, and so pleased to let you know that in 2018, Leeds North East fielded 12 women. And out of those 12 women for local election, we had 9 of them elected on being councillors. As women, when we come together, you have to remember we're half of the human race. So most of the biases that go on, if we stand together and actually push forward, we can succeed. The biases will always be there. The biases will be right in front of you. But what you have to try and do is when the tough time comes, when they come, because they will come, is for you to keep going and do not give up. Kim spoke about people who have mentored her and have supported her. The best friend of a woman is a woman. That's what my mother has told me. So ensure that you are surrounded by people who will lift you up and be with you and show you how lots of things that you would love to do are done, especially those who have gone before you. I joined the Cooperative Party in 2018, and I tell you, I've loved my time serving. I have had challenges from within the Cooperative Party, but I tell you, I have had some very strong cooperatives who have held my hands and have helped me through. The ethos, our values, especially when it comes to community empowerment, I do not see any party that has got that. The fact that we're able to empower ourselves within the community, look at our ethos in terms of community power for our conferences, and what we're able to do locally as cooperatives. For me, that is the joy I have as being a cooperative. Yes, I represent Yorkshire and Humber and the NEC. At the same time, I have been able to meet cooperatives who come to me and say, Abby, what can we do? What should we do? And look at what we've done in Leeds with our food justice campaign. I am very delighted to be the food champion for Leeds City Council, flying on the back of the food justice campaign for Leeds City. 2020 till today has shown a huge disparity in food poverty in our city, and not just in my city, in Leeds, across the country. And it couldn't have been a better time for us to show our values and who we are by coming out and fighting and ensuring that food poverty is dealt with from the bottom right to the top. And I'm really hoping, and I do know, our parliamentarians, I do know that they are putting a very strong word and making sure it's passed into law that nobody goes hungry, and poverty should be eradicated, and everybody has the right to good food, and not just good food, nutritious food, and no one should go hungry. So we've set up food hubs, we've set up pantries, we're doing a lot within our city, and I do know lots of cooperatives across different cities doing the same thing. Right, so as we continue to work and make sure we're well represented, yes, I have been told, I'm not very certain about that. I am the first Black person to be on the NEC, but definitely will not be the last. Representation matters, and I tell you, we're doing a great deal in ensuring that we are representative of all the different cultures in our country. The NEC has got its equality strands. We have the BAME committee, we have the women's committee, just to ensure that we are balanced. And one thing I know, especially within our branches, is for positions of leadership, we always make sure that they are gender balanced. And these are some of the simple examples that we are doing as cooperatives to ensure that everyone is represented and every voice is heard. We're not where we would love to be, but one thing I know for sure is that we are listening. And if you're out there as a cooperative and you feel you are not being listened to, please do get in touch. And we will do our best, we will do the best we can to address whatever issues that you have. So in the council, since being elected since 2019, I have rose from being the BAME lead. I am now the lead for faith and religion. I chair the scrutiny board for health, adults, and active lifestyle. I also chair the hate crime strategic board. I also chair the further education 14 to 19 years strategic board. I'm also an athlete, an England athletics coach. You can be whatever you want to be if you believe in yourself. Like I said earlier, the biases are going to be there, but sisters, it is your choice to believe in yourself and know that when the hard times and the storms come, just prepare yourself to fight the storm, to weather the storm, and still stand your ground. The most powerful women in the world today are women who have stories, who have gone through the hardest of times. So there is nothing that is easy, whether we're in politics, whether we're administrators in offices, engineers, whatever profession you find yourself, the hard times will come, but remember to challenge those biases. As a hate crime chair, we've got 3 ethos, and we say challenge it, report it, and stop it. So we work with different partners across the city, making sure as we continue to challenge all sorts of different crimes, is to make sure that when they are reported, we look forward to a good outcome, the criminal justice system, the Crown prosecution system, to ensure abusers are brought to justice. So those 3 ethos, I would like to use those as well in terms of our biases today. In breaking the bias is that we challenge it, we report it, and we will ensure that we do what we can to stop it. And if God has blessed you with a voice, please make use of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abigail. I feel like everyone's breaking into a spontaneous round of applause, which is how I always feel when I hear you speak. So absolutely keep opening those doors, smashing those glass ceilings, and most importantly, helping other women do the same. I can't wait to see you in Leeds in October, and hopefully many times before that. Now, our final speaker has a challenge because they have to follow Kim and Abby, but Emma Foodie will rise to that challenge, I know. Emma is Assistant General Secretary of the Cooperative Party. I've known Emma for some time as she's held some great roles here in the East Midlands, including Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner and many roles within the Labour Party. Taking up the role of Assistant General Secretary during lockdown means you might not have had the chance to hear much from Emma, so I hope you enjoy hearing from her tonight. I'll hand over to you now, Emma.
Thank you so much, Joanna. And as you say, what a tough lineup to have to follow. I wish I'd gone first, but there we go. No, It's been fantastic to hear from Abigail and to hear from Kim and to be chaired so well by yourself, Joanna. I do have to apologise. I stupidly gave my dog a new squeaky turtle in the hope that it would kind of keep him occupied elsewhere in the house, because he doesn't like it when I speak on calls. So any kind of, activity or a noise that comes from that, yeah, I can only apologise for. But yeah, it's brilliant to be here celebrating International Women's Day, and indeed, the week of International Women's Day. It feels because there's been so many events that have taken place already and that are still scheduled to take place across the week. And I don't know about you, whether it's from what we've heard tonight or whether it's other events that you might have attended as part of the celebration that is International Women's Day. But I've had a couple of days that have been really packed with inspirational women and their stories, and it's been absolutely tremendous. So I feel really uplifted about it, but I also feel more determined than ever that their stories, they can't be the exception, and that success has got to be there for all of us and for everyone who reaches and works for it, rather than just a few who manage to break through. And before I talked about anything else, though, similar to Kim, I did just want to kind of reflect for a moment on the horrific conflict which we obviously see taking place currently in Ukraine. And I think there were some really important points there about how we can best support women over there and the struggles that they're going through. I mean, we know that war always comes at an incredibly tremendous cost to everyone, but for women and girls especially, the threat of sexual violence looms incredibly large, and there's a terrifying possibility and indeed reality for some people in conflict zones, for some women in conflict zones. And that's before you even go on to the other kind of consequences, whether that's disruption to education, whether that's having to evacuate, whether that's taking up the caring responsibilities for children and relatives whilst trying to flee or trying to remain in a war zone. So as I'm sure everyone on the call would agree, we stand in absolute solidarity with Ukraine, but today in particular with the women of Ukraine and say Slava Ukraini to them. So moving on and to introduce myself a little bit, I'm conscious I did a women's network event at the back end of last year and shared kind of some of my experiences and stories. So for some of you might be thinking, oh God, I've heard all this before. But I'm conscious there will be some people on the call who, as Joanna rightly says, I've not had the opportunity to meet. I've not had the opportunity to speak to before. So I will just do a little bit of an introduction to myself. So my name is Foodie. I'm Assistant General Secretary at the Co-op and started in summer last year. And I started alongside Emma Hoddenot, who's the other Assistant General Secretary. And, if, like me, you're motivated to enter politics or public life because you're frustrated that we live in a world where there are more FTSE 100 CEOs called John than there are women, well, the Co-op Party's hitting back for you, because I'm proud to say the senior leadership team here has more Emmas than it has men, which is something that I'm very proud of. But in all seriousness, our party has a lot to do. Our societies, our communities have a lot to do. And I'm really proud that as we emerge from the pandemic and we reevaluate all aspects of British life, that it's the co-op model that is at the forefront. And when we're thinking about what needs to come next, and our understanding that power and wealth, when it's concentrated in the hands of a small number of people, it does not serve us. It does not serve us as a country. And that we need to think about those new models. We need to think of new models of ownership, and we need to give power back to our communities. So just by means of background of me and a bit on my story, if you like, I, like Kim, grew up in the northeast of England, in a different part of Newcastle to her. I grew up in a pretty typical working class household. My work, and I've definitely told this story last time, but it's a really significant one to me and my experiences and my outlook. Which is that, so my mum worked at the local building society, and she worked there as a typist, and she stuck at it for 18 years, by which point that building society had become Northern Rock Bank. And if you hadn't guessed where that goes, spoiler alert, but the 2007 crisis obviously hit Northern Rock and our community very badly, and my mum lost her job, she lost her savings, we lost everything. And it was a very early lesson for me in, how business models that don't serve their workers and communities fundamentally do not work. And so, as I said, that was a really significant experience of me, and it spoke to me a lot on why politics was important, and being involved in politics and being in that space which is, you know, so traditionally been inhabited by people who don't look like us. They aren't women. They don't talk like me. They don't have a background like me, and so all of that was really important for me. So as has been mentioned, I spent the last decade, more than a decade now, as the years continue to rack up, working in the Labour and Co-op movement. I started out as an administrator in Labour North, worked my way up to regional director, and as has been mentioned, served as Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner, and now, of course, as Assistant General Secretary. And I'm really proud of the career that I've had, and the roles that I've had, and the people that I've got to work alongside with in our incredible movement. And so I've been really lucky, and I was reflecting on the bias that I'd experienced in my life. And you know what, initially I thought, do you know what, I can't really think of any. And I was only when I was talking to my friends who are also women who work within the movement, that they started prodding my memory, as it were, and you start to remember experiences and incidents and, you know, inappropriate remarks from colleagues at times, total dismissal from activists based on being the young woman in the room, and indeed, you know, bullying from pretty senior politicians at times as well. And it made me think about how you really normalize all of these things, and what a terrifying thing that is, actually, you know, that these have been quite, as I say, normalized and almost repressed in my memory, so that when I remember my path and where I've come from and what I've done, that I don't think of them, as it were. But it's, as I mentioned, you know, previously having served as one of the youngest regional directors in the Labour Party, as one of the minority of women senior staff when I was there. And again, I was reflecting about those roles and what it took to get there, and the promotions and the progression that kind of sat behind it. And so, you know, let's be clear, there was a lot of hard work that sat behind it, but there was also, and this has, you know, been a recurring theme this evening, and indeed in a lot of the events that I've been taking part on, but it was also actually other sisters and allies who believed in me and who told me to go for things, and who encouraged me when I doubted myself, and have always pushed me and encouraged me to do more, and as much as I possibly could. And so whilst I consider myself to have been quite successful in my career, my story, I feel, feels too rare still, and that we see you know, the same outcomes over and over again, of whether that's always a particular person who seems to get a role, or people feeling that they can't go for it, or people, you know, indeed going a different way because they don't feel that they're getting anywhere within our movement. But despite all of that being said, I still do believe that our party and our movement still, when you look at it in the whole, and you'll see lots of examples of it being the absolute best of us, that it can be brave, it can be bold, and it can be unashamedly proud of the values which are ultimately at our foundation. And I was thinking of a quote, actually, which I feel kind of really summarizes what I wanted to say. And I'm afraid it's no great politician, it's no kind of great statesman, as it were, but it's actually from the film Pride. I don't know if you can remember, I think it was released in about 2014 or something like that. I remember me and Dennis Skinner having a long conversation about it in the car once, but there's a quote in it which, as I said, I just feel really sums up what I wanted to say. And that is, there's a lodge banner down in the welfare, and we bring it out for special occasions. It's 100 years old, and it's a symbol like this, 2 hands. And that is what the movement means, should mean. You support me, I support you, whoever you are, wherever you come from, shoulder to shoulder, hand to hand. And I don't think I could put it better than that, because that is why we come together to tackle bias. It's not to ask permission for it to end, but it's to break it for ourselves. For sisters like me, you understand that, you know, that I have had it easier, and to do everything that we all can through an intersectional focus to provide platforms, to amplify voices, to stand with you shoulder to shoulder. Now, as I said, I'm lucky. I shared a thread yesterday on Twitter, which was just about the experience of women in the workplace. And some of the statistics that sat around it were absolutely awful. And Abigail talks a lot about kind of her experiences in the workplace, which I thought really spoke to it. Whether that's if a woman put forward a CV with a picture of herself with a hijab, and without one, they are 3 times more likely to interview where she doesn't wear the hijab. If you are a gay or a lesbian person in the workplace, you are 3 times as likely to be uncomfortable talking about your life outside of work than you are if you are a straight white man. And then another one, which I'm sure we'll all have experienced before, but this one certainly spoke to me, is in a study of performance reviews, what percentage of women received negative feedback on their personal styles, such as "you can be abrasive," and what percentage of men received that same feedback? And it was 66% of women and 1% of men. I mean, how many people on this call have been told that you're a difficult woman, and that indeed you're abrasive? I just thought that was outrageous. And so, and that's just, as I said, that's just in work. That's not even thinking about healthcare outcomes. It's not thinking about access to education. It's not thinking about violence against women and girls. All of these things which make things so much more difficult, and which feed into the biases which we see day in, day out. And so, just to bring it back around, we must do that together. We must do more together to amplify each other's voices in meetings and in an online sphere, to hype each other up and the work that we're doing. And yes, again, as crucially has been mentioned today, to ask her to stand. We know, and Kim is a perfect example of this, that it takes being asked 3 times for a woman to seriously consider putting herself forward for elected office. So whether that's a parish, district, county, city council, whether it's PCC, whether it's member of parliament, whatever it may be, consider this, you're being asked to stand. So please consider yourself putting yourself forward, and talk to us about standing as a co-op sponsored council candidate, or indeed parliamentary candidate, because we don't need permission from anyone to do what we need to do. We've already got the ideas, we've already got the energy, and we've already got the voices. So let's break down those biases together.
Thank you, Emma. It is so sad that we do normalise the bias. Sadly, it happens to all of us, and we're told far too often to just forget those comments. But shoulder to shoulder, thank you for standing by us. You mentioned sending solidarity to Ukrainian sisters tonight. As the granddaughter of refugees displaced by war, I can appreciate how upsetting the current situation is for those having to leave their homes, those with family and friends in Ukraine, and all of us who want an end to this war. I'm delighted to share that the Cooperative Party is making a donation of £5,000 to the Disaster Emergency Committee Ukraine Emergency Appeal. I'm also pleased to say that the Co-op Group is match funding customer and member donations to the appeal up to £100,000. And I know that other cooperative societies are doing things like removing certain brands of Russian vodka from their shelves, and also placing messages on their shelves explaining why, to demonstrate that we stand with all Ukrainians and Russians calling for peace. So thank you to all our speakers. There's now time for some questions from you. We've had a few come through, but if you have something that you would like to ask, please pop it through in the chat. I've had 3 questions. I'm looking at the time. I'm going to possibly just ask each of you one of these questions, because I think they've fallen quite nicely. So the first one, Kim, was for you directly, was could you be a little bit more specific about calling out discrimination? What discrimination have you faced, and how did you overcome that?
So I think particularly it's interesting hearing Emma talk about it and hearing Abigail talk about it, because I think we all experience it on different levels. But I'm not particularly young. I'm 36 years old, for God's sake. And, I've had a full professional career. And I think it says a lot more about the state of politics today that it's unusual for a 36-year-old woman to stand for senior office. But my opponents have at times used, being quite overt about the fact that I'm too young, too unqualified. My first election, my dog also has a squeaky toy, by the way. My first election, I stood against a man who was the same age as me, and he got none of it, absolutely none of it. And I didn't call it out, and I really, really should have. And then straight after the election, my the Liberal Democrat, who, by the way, might I add, came last in the election, posted a video on his YouTube channel. He was driving at the time, by the way. He had one of those like little thingies in the corner of his car. I mean, all of this is a problem, where he said that I was nothing more than a Barbie doll with a script. And that it was, you know, the electorate had been hoodwinked, essentially. I was nothing more than a Barbie doll with a script. You know, you stand whatever in a Labour rosette in this region, and all, you know, all of the usual kind of tropes, but essentially deeply, deeply misogynistic language, deeply misogynistic attitudes. And then when challenged, rather than holding his hands up and apologising, and actually, you know, he was a senior counsel on Gateshead Council, who, considering his position, given his attitude, he said, well, you know, it's not me, it's what the staff at the Civic Centre were saying. And so I think made what I now know is the wrong decision to try and ignore it, to rise above it. I didn't want to draw attention to it, because I knew deep down that, or I felt that I knew deep down that if he was saying it out loud, then other people must be thinking it, and it gets in your head and it starts to become a problem, and then you start to apply the bias to yourself and think about your own ability and so on. And you know, this is 2 weeks. I discovered this 2 weeks into elected office, and other people called it out for me. And in hindsight, what I should have done is responded to the quotes that I was asked for from the local newspapers and said, it is absolutely disgusting, it's misogynistic, and that man should not be allowed to continue in the positions that he's in. I should have said something publicly, because actually what I should have done is taken a step back and reflected on the fact that my response sends a message to girls, young girls, who actually we have to be bringing up, raised to say that, you know, you shouldn't expect this, this is not what you deserve. And so I've experienced that. And then similarly, my second election, again, the Conservative candidate, you know, he tried to get traction through newsletters and so on about my lifestyle decisions, the fact that I didn't have children, the fact that, again, I was a young woman, some kind of thinly veiled, excuse the dogs, some thinly veiled tropes about, you know, how I must go out a lot and I'm a, you know, party girl, and, you know, it very much painting a picture, so he thought, for the electorate about what a young woman in office would be. And again, you know, we did report him to the Standards Committee for Pauline, definitely. But publicly, I didn't call it out and should have. But yeah, again, you know, we fought behind closed doors and said, you know, you can't do this, or else we will pursue you, because you don't want to draw attention to it, because you worry about how it will make other people think. And actually, you know, I spend my career calling out misogyny, calling out sexism, calling out racism, calling out homophobia publicly on behalf of other people, on behalf of the electorate, on behalf of the Labour Party. And yet, on the times when it's happened to me, I found that very difficult to do. And it's a very difficult thing to do. And I think we've got to be honest about that. But reflecting, you know, I do think that we have to challenge that and use the platform that we've got and use the voice that we've got to say it is not acceptable. Because if it's all right to get away with that, then whatever's next.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, Kim. The next question actually follows on really nicely from that. So I will put it to probably Emma and Abigail. We're encouraging women to stand in positions of power, but many are put off by the disgusting negativity and personal attacks in social media. How do panel members address this? I don't know. Abigail, do you want to take that one first?
Yes, it's sad that we get more abuse online and everywhere more than our male counterparts. But like I said earlier, when I was speaking about things being tough and we just have to rise to it, I mean, it's sad that we have to work twice as hard as our male counterparts when it comes to election, you know, what you wear, how you look, what your hair is like, and all of that stuff. But you know what? Look at Parliament, 51% representation. No other party does that apart from the Labour Party. The same thing when I come to Leeds. We in our council, we have more women representing than we have the men. So we have to persist. We have to go on. Whatever self-care, there are courses about online abuse, trolling that, you know, elected members are put through, security and all. So take whatever training is given or avenue that helps us protect ourselves and our self-care. That is so, I mean, don't spend your whole day on social media, because sometimes it does drive me nuts. So for me, I go on there, I post what I have to go, I go just get busy. And then when I have to come back to reply to stuff, I do. But honestly, until we have real legislative laws on online abuse, we are going to continue to struggle with this. So the whole fight in Parliament about misogyny and all this going on with the bias, lots of all of this needs to be legislated for us to be protected. And if it's not, then we will still be where we are, and every time having to fight twice as hard as our male counterparts. But at least, especially when it comes to online abuse, from the football racism that happened last year after the Euros, something at least has been put into legislation in terms of abuse. What we would like to see go further is all them anonymous accounts, you know, because people who abuse you, you don't know who they are. So you don't even know how to arrest them, even though you report them. So these are the things, our struggle continues, but we've come very far from where our mothers fought 100 years ago just for us to get the right to vote. So let's not get discouraged. Let's keep fighting. Let's keep persisting.
Thank you, Abigail. Emma, anything to add to that?
I think Abigail summarised it really succinctly and with a very good call to action at the end. But she's exactly right. You know, the Online Harms Bill was a perfect opportunity for government to legislate more robustly in this area, and it has sought not to do so. And that's exceptionally frustrating and has a real consequence, whether it's for women, whether it's for ethnic minorities, whether it's for LGBTQ+. People who are on those platforms, and so that's really frustrating, I think, to say to begin with. So I think, as Abigail says, you know, you can only therefore operate in the environment we have now. We should obviously continue to campaign for more robust legislation in that area, without doubt. But in the meantime, I mean, LWN, I think, does a particularly good course for those who might be interested around kind of how to deal with, as you say, you know, trolls and abuse on social media. And I think those kind of tips and advice around self-care are really important as well, because we absolutely have to make sure to protect ourselves and make sure that, you know, that you're all right. And as you say, whether that's stepping away, I mean, I know elected representatives, not just women, although, as we say, we know it affects women, and particularly Black women more, is that people who've deleted their accounts and things like that, because, as you say, otherwise, every time there's a notification come through, your natural reaction is obviously to, oh, well, what's this person said? What's this person said? And even if it is a completely faceless troll, it gets in your head. It gets in your head, and you think that that's what people are saying. You think that it's more widespread than it is. You think, you know, you mull on that for the rest of the day, and that's perhaps the more lower end aspect of it as well, as opposed to the, you know, the more kind of abusive and aggressive messages that take place as well. But as Abigail says, don't let that be a reason not to do something. You know, there's a fantastic support network in the Co-op Party, in the Labour Party, and whether you've got them in your own friendships and relationship groups as well, and to just make sure that you protect yourself. But please don't see it as a reason, as a barrier to doing things.
Thank you. We've got more questions than we have time for, because it's already 7:02. But I have one question that I'm going to ask probably Emma just to have a very quick stab at, which is, how do we apply our cooperative values to standing against other women in the selection process?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Indeed.
And I think my view is to that is the first thing to say is that none of us, whether it's women against women, women against men, whatever, none of us have a God-given right to standing or holding particular seats or elected office, things like that. And that is the wrong way for us to think about things. That being said, I think there's right and proper ways to stand against each other, you know, being honest, being transparent, being direct. And I think in making sure that it's, you know, that people know that they're being challenged rather than being blindsided. And then I think ultimately is making sure that you've got a clean and fair fight. Ultimately, I think the risk with all these things is that we drag each other down. And that is absolutely, you know, not what the sisterhood is about. We should celebrate one another's successes, and we should always encourage each other. But that's not to say that that we shouldn't be able to stand for things and challenge things within our own right, on our own platform, putting our best selves forward as being an alternative choice.
I think that is an absolute smashing answer. Thank you. As I say, there are more questions, but I am very conscious that we've overrun our time, as I knew we would, because it's such an important topic. So I'd like to thank all of our speakers and thank all of you for joining us tonight, or those of you who are watching the recording afterwards. We were absolutely spoiled for choice with all the fabulous women that we know, but we hope that Kim, Abigail and Emma have inspired you. Certainly inspired me. Thank you to everybody involved in this event tonight. Maybe next year we'll just have to go for International Women's Week to cram everything in. I will leave you with Abigail's request to challenge it, report it and stop it, and Emma's request of ask her to stand and seriously think about standing for any position that comes up. You can always get in touch with us at the party and ask us for advice or help. We will always be there to stand and support you. For questions that have been asked on the message, I have asked people to email in with more detail and we will answer those. But for now, thank you everybody for being here. I will wish you a happy International Women's Day +1 or -364 and wish everybody a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks everyone, bye.